Over the years, I've had folks ask me, Steve, what exactly does a coroner do? Most people think of it as someone who just shows up, signs a piece of paper, and leaves. But the truth is, the office of coroner has a long, sometimes surprising history, and it carries powers and responsibilities that can change the course of justice. I ought to know, I served as coroner in 2 counties here in Arkansas, first in Garland County, then later in Pulaski County, and yes, in both counties I had to do something most people wouldn't believe. I had to arrest the sheriff. That's not something you expect when you first run for office, but that's part of the job. The whole idea of a coroner started way back in England, back in 1194. They called them Custodes Placatorum Coronae, keepers of the pleas of the crown. Their job wasn't so much about medical science, it was about protecting the king's money. It always is about money. If someone died suddenly or treasure washed up on shore, the coroner made sure the crown got its cut. So, tax collecting, I guess. As time went on, coroners became more involved in investigating deaths, figuring out whether someone had been murdered or died by accident or by natural causes. That English tradition crossed the ocean with the early colonists. In fact, the very first coroner in America was appointed in 1637 in St. Mary's County, Maryland. Before long, in places like Plymouth Colony, coroners were being elected by the people. By the 1800s, most coroners in the United States weren't doctors at all. They were local politicians, sometimes even undertakers or sheriffs. And that meant the quality of investigations varied widely. Some coroners were known for corruption, for looking the other way, or for rubber stamping whatever the sheriff or prosecutor wanted. That's part of why in the late 1800s, Massachusetts came up with a new system, the medical examiner. Instead of an elected coroner, they used a trained physician to handle death investigations. Over the years, more states followed that model. But here in America, we've never been able to settle on one system. Even today, some states have medical examiners, some have coroners, and a lot have a mix of both. Now, here's the part most folks don't know. In some states, the coroner actually has the authority to arrest the sheriff. It sounds strange, but it goes back to the need for a check and balance. What if the sheriff himself was involved in wrongdoing? Or if he refused to carry out his duties? The coroner was the one officer who could step in. I know that power firsthand. During my career, I had to exercise it not once, but twice. Once in Garland County and later in Pulaski County. Believe me, it's not something you look forward to, but when the law gives you a duty, you either step up or you fail the public. I chose to step up. And I proved that because when the coroner has arrested the sheriff and the sheriff is incapacitated in his jail, the coroner actually assumes the duties of the sheriff. So in Pulaski County, I was actually the sheriff for 38 minutes, and you know what? Not one crime, not even a traffic arrest, occurred during my watch. I started in the mid-'70s, a young man living on Lake Hamilton in Hot Springs. Before long, I was elected coroner of Garland County. I investigated every kind of death you can imagine, natural, accidental, suicide, and homicide. I learned quickly that this work wasn't about the dead. It was about the living, about giving families answers and making sure justice had a chance. In the early 1980s, Governor Bill Clinton appointed me as director of the Arkansas State Crime Lab. That gave me a front row seat to the growing role of science in death investigations. DNA, toxicology, forensic pathology, they were changing the game. But even as the science advanced, the heart of the job stayed the same. Get it right from the very beginning. Later, I moved on to Pulaski County and once again wore the coroner's badge. Along the way, I never forgot that independence was the most important part of this office. Because if the coroner isn't independent, justice can be lost before it ever begins. The coroner's job is about more than cause of death. It's about truth. It's about fairness. It's about standing up even when it's uncomfortable to make sure the record is honest. Sometimes that meant grieving families I had to tell things they didn't really want to hear. Other times it meant going toe-to-toe with law enforcement when their story didn't match the evidence. And yes, once in a while, it even meant arresting the sheriff. So when people ask me about the most critical parts of the coroner's duties, I tell them that they've got to be thorough, they've got to be honest, and they've got to be independent. Shoe leather work, boots on the ground, at the very start of an investigation will save embarrassment, injustice, and heartbreak down the road. That's a little history of the office of coroner, from the kings of old England to the sheriffs of Arkansas, and a little bit about my own journey in between. I share these stories not just as a history lesson, but as reminders that the work matters. Justice depends on it. I'm Steve Navoychek, the 501 Coroner. Thanks for listening to A Coroner's Memory. Until the next time, stay curious and stay aware.